Hey, what is up everyone? Discussion Verse here to go over 28 years later, the third chapter in one of the most unique horror franchises ever made, and I've gotta say, I really enjoyed it. From the moment it kicks off, the movie does a great job honoring the original tone of 28 Days Later, while pushing the lore further in ways that feel fresh and honestly kind of disturbing. What really caught my attention right away was the evolution of the rage virus itself. There's no denying the infected have changed, and I'll be honest, I was right about the direction the story would take. With my last video, I mentioned that if the infected could starve, then nature would eventually force them to adapt or die out. And 28 years later does exactly that. It doesn't over-explain, which I respect, but it shows enough to let us fill in the blanks. That's smart horror writing. Before I go any further, this is your friendly reminder to smash that like button, leave a comment down below, and if you're new to the channel and enjoying the video so far, make sure you hit that subscribe button and then turn on that notification bell so you never miss a new video. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. Early in the film, we're introduced to different types, as some are decayed and slow moving, these are dubbed slow-lows, and others are faster and lead packs, which are called alphas. And this is where it gets really interesting, as the movie finally addresses something that fans like myself have long speculated about for years, is that the infected don't eat their victims, they just attack. So they're not feeding for sustenance, they're not eating brains or anything like that. So this means, in theory, they should starve. 28 years later actually addresses this and shows their progression as the rage virus continues to evolve within them. There are scenes where the infected are seen hunting deer and even catching fish in nearby creeks. That's not mindless rage anymore, that's primal instinct almost taking over for them, but they're still not in control of themselves or back to normal. Also like the idea that there still is a human threat that does lie around, because if you recall, Spike's father Jamie does mention that when they are talking about the outside world from their protected community and how it's very important to keep it safe from those threats, whether it's infected or human alike. And I love that that kind of came true towards the end, but that's something I'll go in a little bit later. On top of the potential threats from the infected and non-infected, the movie manages to showcase how even amidst utter chaos, life is still possible, as we have an infected woman who somehow gives birth to a human baby, and this baby shows no sign of a rage virus or any infection when it is birthed. This then allows the movie to take on a fantastical element, as it's almost the chosen one child in a sense, right? Because we have this miracle birth in that the child was born from an infected host but wasn't infected itself, which might lead to some cure down the road, though this definitely opens up more questions than it gives answers. Dr. Carlson theorizes in the movie that somehow the placenta helped protect the baby while it was developing and kept it from becoming infected by the rage virus. It's definitely going to be a plot point that picks up with 28 years later, the Bone Temple, and the third film to cap off the new trilogy. And I really feel like that does change the entire game. Meanwhile, while all this is ongoing, there's something else really noticeable. In 28 years later, the UK and Ireland are still completely quarantined while the rest of the world has clearly moved on. This is made especially clear through the character of Eric, a NATO soldier who enters the picture rocking modern tech, a working smartphone, clean gear, and no sign that he's been living in an apocalypse. That contrast is very powerful on its own. It shows that the outside world didn't fall, they just cut the UK off, and pretty much Ireland too, and left it to rot to the rest of the rage virus and whoever was there still infected. That kind of isolation hits hard, and you can definitely draw some real world parallels. The most obvious comparison that you can make would be a brutal metaphor for the Brexit. And there's also some commentary on how the UK handled the COVID pandemic overall, such as sealed borders, national pride, and being left behind while everyone else adapt. This then brings me to one of the most oldest and still most misunderstood things about this franchise. These are not zombies, and they never were. I'll keep beating this drum because it matters. 28 days later, weeks, and now years are all about a virus, not the undead. Danny Boyle and Alex Garland have said this multiple times. The infected aren't reanimated corpses, they're human. They're just consumed by a rage-inducing virus that robs them of logic, empathy, and self-control. They can bleed out, they can starve, they can die. So let's finally put that zombie label to rest. Now let's talk about the ending, because it's wild and honestly has the fans divided. At the start of the film, we meet a young boy who watches in horror as his family, which would be his presumed sisters. From there, he escapes to a church where his father, the local priest, is waiting. The father sees the outbreak as divine judgment, essentially embracing the outbreak that's seen in that local area. From there, he does realize that his son is scared, and he gives him his metal cross, which his son takes, and then his son hides underneath the floorboards. Fast forward to the film's final act, and we meet Jimmy Crystal, a man in a tracksuit, a tiara, and a blonde mullet wig, leading a gang of brightly dressed people also in tracksuits, and they're almost a coordinated outfit. Jimmy shows up in the middle of the character Spike's in his solo mission, just as Spike is being overwhelmed by the infected, and it's Jimmy and his gang, who by the way, are color-coded much like the Teletubbies or the Power Rangers, who save the day essentially. But here's the twist. Jimmy Crystal is that same boy from the beginning. We know this because his mother calls him Jimmy in the opening scene, in which he survived, but clearly he didn't survive fully sane. Here's where it gets dark, as the character himself is a direct reference to Jimmy Savile. He's a disgraced UK TV personality figure whose horrific sexual abuse misconduct came to light after his death, but Jimmy Crystal, the character, probably has no idea about that legacy because he's grown up in a quarantine apocalypse. He's only had fragments of British pop culture to build his identity, so that would be kids shows, old reruns, probably even Savile's variety show. So now he's essentially crafted a twisted superhero persona based on misunderstood childhood memories, and his gang wears the matching tracksuits, flipping around like cartoon heroes. And in his mind, Jimmy Crystal is the savior. He's protecting people, but to us, it's clear that he's deeply disturbed and more than likely dangerous. Even more interesting, there's reason to think that this might not be happening as exactly as we see it, as earlier in the film, Spike almost takes his Power Rangers toy with him on his first hunt, but he leaves it behind. Then later, when Jimmy's gang arrives, like full-on action figures flipping through the air, wiping out infected with style, it just feels unreal, almost like a fantasy, which brings me to the idea that Spike is an unreliable narrator. Maybe the Jimmy gang isn't quite what we see. Maybe this is Spike's trauma turning a group of survivors and saviors into something more mythic, more heroic, and more comforting than what they probably truly are. After all, when you've grown up in a horror, sometimes the only way to cope is to rewrite the story. And honestly, that's kind of what 28 years later is all about. It's not just about the infection, it's about trauma, survival, and how humans, especially the kids that are growing up, try to make sense of the senseless. The movie pushes the franchise forward while still respecting everything that came before, and ultimately 28 years later is weird, ambitious, but deeply layered and totally worth the wait. It's 100% an evolution of not just the virus, but of the world, the lore, and the themes that have always made the franchise hit harder than your average apocalypse story. While it's gritty and smart, and it's a beautiful stepping stone for the confirmed trilogy, which both Danny Boyle and Alex Garland have long talked about, and we do know that 28 years later, The Bone Temple is set to release January 2026. With that being said, this does wrap up my thoughts for 28 years later, and I highly recommend that you guys go see it if you haven't already. Remember to help out the channel by smashing that like button, leave a comment down below, and if you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe, then turn on that notification bell so you never miss a new video. Until next time, I'll catch you guys later. Peace!